I never intended to keep that phone. Honestly, I didn't intend to keep this house either. My plan was simple. Spend 2 summer months renovating the old Victorian house at 42 Blackwood Street, sell it, and use that money to pay off student loans. Aunt Martha passed away last November, leaving this estate to her only remaining relative, me. It was a 1924 architecture. Beautifully gloomy, with oak floors that always groaned under every footstep, and the characteristic musty smell of things forgotten by time. I found the phone on the afternoon of the 3rd day, while cleaning up the mess in the 2nd floor hallway. It wasn't the cheap plastic phone you'd see in the 90 seconds. It was a real monster. A jet black Western Electric model 302 made of hard, heavy Bakelite. It sat lonely on a small recessed wall shelf, covered in a layer of dust so thick I could write my name on it. When I picked it up, its weight surprised me, as if I were holding a brick rather than a communication device. But what caught my attention wasn't its age or weight. It was the cord. The cord connecting the body to the wall wasn't pulled out. It was cut. The cut was jagged, with small, dull copper strands sticking out, as if someone had used a dull knife, or a rusty pair of scissors, to gnaw it off in a rushed panic. I remember frowning, my thumb brushing over that sharp wire end. An irrational chill ran down my spine, but I quickly dismissed it. Aunt Martha probably did that when she started getting senile in her final years. It's an antique, I told myself, trying to dispel the suffocating silence of the hallway. Clean it up and it'll sell for a fortune on eBay. I took it down to the living room, used a damp cloth to wipe off the dust. Under the yellow light of the late afternoon, the phone looked strangely shiny, like a giant beetle lying in ambush on the tea table. The rotary dial spun smoothly with a satisfying zip. Zip sound. Returning to position with a sharp metallic click. I left it there, right next to the armchair where I usually read, as a vintage-style decorative item. An inanimate object. A lump of plastic and metal dead for decades. That night was the first night I slept alone in the house after the plumber left. It was 11:45 p.m. The whole house was immersed in absolute silence, that thick silence of the suburbs that a city dweller like me could never get used to. I turned off the living room light to go upstairs to sleep. When passing by the tea table, moonlight pierced through the window blinds, casting onto the phone. For a moment, just a tenth of a second, I felt like the receiver seemed to vibrate slightly, even though no sound came out. I froze, holding my breath to listen. Nothing. Just the wind whistling through the cracks of the dilapidated window. I shook my head, laughing at my own cowardice, then walked quickly up the stairs. I didn't know that was my last peaceful night at 42 Blackwood Street. I was dragged out of sleep, not by a gentle noise, but by a brutal auditory assault. It was a mechanical, rough sound echoing through the empty house. Ring, ring, ring. The metal hammer struck repeatedly against the brass bell inside the box, creating an ear-piercing sound that no modern smartphone could simulate. My heart pounded in my chest, so hard I felt it reverberating against my ribs. I fumbled for the iPhone on the nightstand, thinking I had forgotten to turn off the alarm. The screen lit up, blinding. 2:13 a.m. The iPhone screen was completely silent. No calls, no alarm. But the ringing continued, echoing from downstairs, piercing through the wooden floor, creeping into every corner of the darkness. Ring. Ring. Drowsiness evaporated instantly, replaced by extreme confusion. I was all alone in this house. I never signed up for landline service. And most importantly, damn it, that phone down there didn't have a connecting wire? Calm down, I whispered, voice hoarse. I stepped out of bed. Bare feet touching the cold wooden floor made me shiver. The ringing seemed louder, more urgent as I opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. I fumbled my way down the stairs, not daring to turn on the light due to some invisible fear. That childish feeling that if I couldn't see anything, then nothing could see me either. The living room was immersed in dim darkness, with only a bit of light from street lamps casting through the window. And there, on the tea table, the Western Electric 302 was vibrating violently. It shook so hard I could hear the plastic base clattering against the wood surface. I stood, rooted at the foot of the stairs, staring at it. My reason screamed that this was physically impossible. A device without a power source cannot work, but that ear-piercing ringing sound was real. I walked closer, dry swallowing a bitter gulp of saliva. My hand reached out, trembling, fingers touching the cold receiver. The moment I picked it up, the ringing stopped abruptly. Silence descended suddenly, heavy as a lead blanket pressing on my chest. I slowly brought the receiver to my ear, holding my breath. "Hello?" My voice rang out, tiny and weak amidst the vast room. No answer, only the hissing sound of static. It sounded crunchy, intermittent, like the sound of an old TV losing signal, or wind whistling through desolate rock crevices. No human voice, no breathing, just an indefinite void, full of interference. I held the line for about 10 seconds, then slammed it down. The impact of hard plastic sounded dry and harsh. I flipped the phone over, shining my mobile flashlight on it. The cord was still dangling there, the jagged cut end exactly as it was this afternoon. No backup battery, no technological miracle at all. Capacitors, I muttered, trying to find a scientific explanation. Maybe the old capacitors inside still held residual charge. Sometimes sudden temperature changes cause short circuits. That was a plausible sounding explanation, at least plausible enough that I didn't have to run out of the house at 2 a.m. I convinced myself that old electronic items often had such bizarre technical glitches. I turned back upstairs, trying not to run, but my footsteps were faster than usual. When I pulled the blanket over my head, I still felt cold. And even though I reassured myself, I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep again, because in that chaotic mess of static noise earlier, I swore I heard another very small sound, like the clicking sound of someone tapping their fingernails lightly on the receiver at the other end. The next day passed in a state of vague tension. I tried to focus on sanding the window frames, but my eyes unconsciously kept glancing toward the tea table in the living room. The phone still lay there, silent, harmless, as if mocking my fear from last night. I had intended to throw it away this morning, but that damn curiosity, or perhaps the arrogance of a man who believes in science, held me back. I wanted to prove I was right, that it was just residual charge, that it wouldn't happen again. That night, I didn't go to bed. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee, slumped into the armchair opposite the phone, about 2 meters away. I turned off all the lights, leaving only the faint blue light casting from the open laptop on my lap. On the screen was a real-time countdown clock. 2:10 a.m. Quiet. 2:11 a.m. Only the wind whistling gently in the garden. 2:12 a.m. My heart started beating faster. Cold sweat seeping out in my palms. 2:13 a.m. CLang. The first ring rang out like a gunshot in the confined space, causing me to startle and spill the entire cup of coffee on my pants. Ring. 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 It rang again, on time to the second. Not a random short circuit. This was a schedule. I threw the laptop aside, stood up. This time I didn't hesitate. I wanted to catch this freakish prank in the act. I grabbed the receiver, pressed it tight to my ear, the other hand gripping the cold foam body. "Who is this?" I snapped, voice trembling with anger mixed with fear. "This prank isn't funny!" Answering me was not the crunchy static noise like last night. The interference had disappeared completely, leaving a connection clear to the point of being creepy. And then I heard it. A breath. But not a normal breath. It was wet, heavy, and intermittent. Wheeze, rasp, gurgle, slurp. It sounded like someone trying to inhale oxygen into waterlogged lungs. Or worse, the sound of air bubbling through a torn, blood-filled throat. Each raspy breath was an effort of extreme pain, dragging on and on, then ending with a wet gurgle. What the hell is this? I stepped back, but my hand couldn't let go of the receiver. Suddenly, I realized the room had changed. The sweltering heat of the July summer night vanished. The air around me was freezing, icy, as if I had just thrown open a freezer door. I looked down and saw my breath puffing out in misty white clouds before my face. The hair on my arms stood up. This cold was not natural. It radiated from the very phone I was holding in my hand. The breathing in the receiver suddenly became more rapid, louder, as if the person, or thing on the other end, realized I was listening. It was excited. Wheeze. Rasp. I let out a short scream and slammed the receiver down onto the cradle. The room went silent again. The cold vanished as quickly as it came. The condensation on the black plastic surface of the phone slowly faded, leaving behind small streaks of water running down, like drops of sweat or tears. I stood there, panting, hands clutching my chest. I knew one thing for sure. No capacitor in this world could create the sound of those waterlogged lungs. I didn't go back to bed. Sleep had now become a luxury concept I dared not dream of. Instead, I dragged the toolbox out from under the stairs, took a Phillips screwdriver, and returned to the living room. I needed to see the guts of this monster. I flipped the phone over, mobile flashlight beaming straight onto the 4 rusty screws under the base. My hand was still trembling slightly, making the light dance on the shiny black metal surface. Screech. Screech. The sound of rusty metal grinding together was ear-piercing as I turned the first screw. It was stiff, as if sealed for decades, but anger mixed with fear gave me abnormal strength. When the base plate popped off, I held my breath, bracing myself to see a hidden battery pack, a modern electronic circuit board tucked in by some prankster, or anything that could explain that freakish ringing. But inside was completely empty. No battery, no connecting wires. Even the mechanical bell hammer mechanism was jammed solid with rust and cobwebs. I used the screwdriver tip to prod the bell lever. It didn't budge at all. Physically, this phone couldn't emit a sound, let alone ring through the whole house. I sat slump on the floor, staring at that empty, dusty shell. The chill didn't come from temperature, but from the collapse of logic. I was facing something that did not obey the laws of this world. The next day, I decided to change tactics. If my naked eyes and ears could be deceived by hallucinations due to stress, then machines wouldn't know how to lie. I would record evidence. That night, I prepared thoroughly like a hunter. I placed the iPhone on a small tripod, aimed straight at the tea table. I plugged in a power bank to ensure the battery was always 100% full. I even placed an old Sony digital voice recorder that I used for college interviews in the corner of the room, 2:10 a.m. I pressed record. The iPhone screen displayed the image of the jet black phone, sharp and silent, 2:13 a.m. clang. The ringing tore through the space, louder and more aggressive than the previous 2 nights. It wasn't just sound anymore. I could feel the sound waves vibrating my whole chest. I held my breath, looking at the phone screen. The moment the first ring rang out, my iPhone screen started twitching. Green and purple vertical and horizontal stripes ran across the screen. The image of the rotary phone was distorted, stretched out grotesquely. I rushed forward, intending to grab the recorder. But as soon as my finger touched the rec button, a piercing shriek rang out from the recorder's speaker. Then it went dead. Turning back to the iPhone, I saw a sight that knotted my guts. The phone battery was draining at a frantic speed. 80%, 50%, 20%. In just a few seconds, the body heated up like a coal. Before the screen turned off completely, amidst the digital noise, I saw the image on the screen did not match reality. In reality, the rotary phone still lay still on the table, but on the glitching iPhone screen, its receiver was floating in midair, as if an invisible hand was lifting it up. The screen went black, darkness crashed down. Only the frantic ringing remained in the dark, and the acrid smell of burnt electronic components. I had lost my only means of communication with the outside world. My iPhone was dead, smoking profusely on the floor, but the rotary phone was still screaming. Ring, ring. That sound was no longer merely noise. It was like an invisible drill boring straight into my frontal lobe. I knew I couldn't run. In the thick darkness, mixed with the acrid smell of burning plastic, I realized a cruel truth. It wanted me to answer the phone, and it wouldn't stop until I did that. I stepped forward, each footstep heavy as if wearing lead. I didn't turn on the light. I dared not look into the wall mirror for fear of seeing something reflected behind my back. I yanked the receiver up, pressing it hard against my ear with such force that my ear cartilage ached. "I'm listening!" I screamed, tears of anger and fear pouring out. "What the hell do you want?" This time, there was no static, nor was there silence. The sound I heard made the blood in my body freeze solid. It was breathing. But it didn't come from the tiny speaker in the receiver. That sound had spatial depth. 3D. I heard the wheezing inhale in my left ear, where the receiver was, but the wet exhale rang out in my right ear. As if that person was standing, embracing me from behind, placing their mouth close to the nape of my neck, and the phone was just a conduit for that presence. I froze, not daring to turn my head. A blast of icy air, carrying the fishy smell of mud and mold, gently blew onto my nape, with each breath in the receiver. Wheeze, slurp. Who? I whispered. Voice stuck in my throat. A voice rang out. No, it wasn't exactly a voice. It was the sound of vocal cords soaked in water too long, swollen and cracked, trying to mold themselves to form words. H, O, A, Nen, G. It called my name. It dragged the last syllable out into a ghastly hiss, like wind whistling through a narrow door crack. My name, through its tongue, sounded like a filthy curse. I screamed, swinging my arm to throw the receiver hard against the wall. Thwack! The hard Bakelite plastic hit the drywall, creating a deep dent. The phone fell to the floor, silent. The cold behind my back vanished instantly. The room returned to normal temperature, but I was shaking violently, cold sweat soaking my shirt back. I backed away, slipped, and fell, sitting on the floor, eyes glued to that pitch-black object lying askew. It knew my name. It was right here. The next morning, when the first sunlight shone through the window, bringing me a bit of false courage, I decided to end this once and for all. I didn't dare touch it directly anymore. I took a thick towel, draped it over the phone like wrapping a dead animal's corpse, then grabbed it. I ran straight to the backyard, opened the lid of the huge metal industrial trash bin, and threw it hard inside. Bam! A heavy impact sound rang out from the bottom of the empty bin. I wasn't at ease yet. I ran to the shed, took out a bicycle chain lock, and tightly wrapped the bin lid. Done. I went back into the house, locked all windows, bolted the main door with 2 layers of locks, and even dragged the sofa to block the entrance. I felt a little relieved. A stupid relief. That night, I hid in the upstairs bedroom, the room door also locked tight. I lay curled up on the bed, covered head to toe, clutching a paring knife, the only weapon I could find. The wall clock ticked on. 2, 10, 2, 11, 2, 12. I held my breath, listening for sounds from the yard. If it rang in the trash bin, I wouldn't hear it. I would be safe. 213A. M. V. 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 A vibrating sound rang out, not a chime-like ring, but the violent vibration of a hard object hitting wood, and it didn't come from the yard. It came from right under my back. The entire bed frame was vibrating to the rhythm of the ringing. Clack, 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 clack. The springs in the mattress resonated with that vibration, creating ghostly metallic moans. I screamed, rolling quickly onto the floor, heart feeling like it would burst. In the dim light casting from the window, I knelt on the floor and looked under the bed. There, deep in the darkest corner against the wall, was the Western Electric 302. It was vibrating madly, clean, glossy, with not a speck of dust left. The towel was gone. But the most terrible thing was the cord. The phone cord cut the previous day was no longer short. It had grown long, shiny, black and wet, thick as a thumb. It was writhing, slithering all over the floor under the bed like a giant snake, weaving through the bed legs and slowly heading towards my feet. I had locked the door to keep outsiders out, but I forgot one thing. This thing was never outside. I rushed out of the bedroom like a madman, slamming the door shut, and pressed my whole body against the wooden door, panting heavily. Inside, the clack of the phone hitting the wooden floor continued, sounding like crushed bones. I needed a shelter, but more importantly, I needed answers. Why me? Why this house? I ran into Aunt Martha's study at the end of the hall, the only room I hadn't cleaned yet. The smell of old paper and dry ink assaulted my nose. I turned on the light, the sallow light making the room look like a catacomb filled with books. I frantically rummaged through the desk drawers, looking for anything. Will, house deeds, or an explanation for this madness. My hand touched a dark brown leather-bound notebook, lying deep under a pile of unpaid bills. It was Aunt Martha's diary. The first pages were written in neat handwriting, telling about garden renovations. But later on, the handwriting became more scribbled, shaky, pressed so hard it tore the paper. October 14. It rang again. I already pulled the plug. Why does it still ring? The ringing makes my heart ache. October 22. I made a mistake bringing it home from the flea market. The seller didn't look me in the eye when taking the money. Now I understand. It's not a machine. It's a door. I flipped quickly through the pages, cold sweat dripping onto the yellowed paper. October 30. I hear them whispering inside the walls. Not through the receiver anymore. They are crawling out. I took scissors and cut the cord. I thought cutting the cord meant disconnecting. I was wrong. Cutting the cord was just throwing the gate wide open. That cord. It doesn't connect to the wall. It connects straight down below. The last line was written on November 1st, the day Aunt passed away. The handwriting was large, askew, as if written in extreme panic. Never answer. If it calls your name, it means it has remembered your scent. I can't breathe anymore. The air in this room is thick as mud. I dropped the diary. The autopsy report said Aunt Martha died of heart failure. But now I remember a detail the undertaker mentioned. When they found her, her hand was clutching something invisible, and her mouth was full of soil. Black, wet, foul soil. Exactly the scent I smelled when answering the phone last night. She didn't die of heart disease. She drowned. Drowned right on dry land, in her own home. Bam! A loud noise from the bedroom echoed out, cutting off my train of thought. The bedroom door, where I had just escaped, was being pounded hard from the inside. It was tired of vibrating. It was breaking down the door to get out. I had no time to think anymore. Survival instinct screamed, "Run!" I rushed down the stairs, skipping 3 steps at a time, almost spraining my ankle. The only goal was the main door. I just needed to get out of here, run to the car, and never return to this hell on earth again. I threw myself at the heavy oak door, hand grabbing the lock latch. Rigid. I twisted hard, using both hands to turn the latch, but it didn't budge at all. It didn't look like it was jammed due to rust, but as if the lock's metal had been melted and welded solid to the door frame. No. Impossible. I screamed, punching the door hard. I ran to the living room window, yanking down the curtains. I grabbed a stool, intending to smash the glass. Clang! The stool hit the glass, but the glass didn't break. Instead, it emitted a dull sound like striking a solid boulder. The glass surface just vibrated violently, but didn't have a single crack. This house. It no longer obeyed the laws of physics. It had become a sealed box. And then, that sound returned. Ring. 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 Not from one place. The phone ringing sounded from everywhere. From the kitchen. From the basement. From upstairs. From inside the walls themselves. As if hundreds of phones were hidden behind the wallpaper, and all of them rang simultaneously. Pop! The chandelier in the living room exploded, glass crashing to the floor. Pop! Pop! One by one, bulbs in the hallway, kitchen, staircase, all exploded. Darkness rushed in fast like a flood, swallowing the last bit of light. Only the faint, ghostly green light remained from the electronic clock display on the microwave. 2:13. Time had stopped. I stood rooted in the middle of the pitch-black living room, surrounded by a symphony of hundreds of screaming phone rings. But most terrible of all was the sound gliding on the floor. Swish. Swish. Slithering sounds. Not one, but many. Phone cords. They were crawling down from the stairs, from the ceiling, whipping the wooden floor like leather whips. I backed up, back touching the wall. I was surrounded. The headache struck like a hammer blow straight to the temple. The resonance from hundreds of invisible phones constricted my chest, making every breath painful. I felt a warm stream of liquid flowing from my nose, then from my ears. I wiped my hand on my face. Blood. That sound was not only deafening, it was crushing my nervous system. I knew I couldn't stand it for more than another minute, before the brain blood vessels burst. Suddenly, everything went silent. The silence came so suddenly that I collapsed to the floor, ears still buzzing with ghostly you sounds. In the thick darkness, a pale green light appeared in the middle of the living room. It emanated from the Western Electric 302. It had returned there sometime, sitting imposingly on the tea table like a king on a dark throne. It didn't ring. It just lay there, waiting. Its pitch-black cord was no longer slithering around. It was stretching out, running straight towards me, wrapping gently around my ankle like an invitation, or a chain. I understood the rules of the game. It didn't want to kill me with noise. It wanted me to voluntarily open the door one last time. I crawled towards the phone, hands clawing at the wooden floor full of broken glass shards, ignoring the bleeding cuts. I was no longer screaming scared. I was numb. I just wanted it to end. I tremblingly reached out, grasping the receiver. It was cold. Colder than ice. A bone-chilling cold that instantly numbed my fingertips. I brought it to my ear. "I surrender," I whispered, voice broken. "What the hell are you?" No static. No wet, wheezing breath like previous times. The line was perfectly clean. Then a voice rang out. It wasn't a demon's voice, nor the raspy voice of a drowned person. It was my voice. It was exactly my voice, from intonation, pacing, to pitch. But it was chillingly calm, completely opposite to my current panic. "Thank you, Hoang." The voice rang out from the other end. Finally, I'm in. I was stunned. A wave of nausea hit me violently. Where are you?" I asked, eyes darting around the pitch-black room, searching for the silhouette of the one mimicking my voice. "I'm not in the room," my voice on the phone replied, accompanied by a soft chuckle. "And I'm not in this phone either." I frowned, not yet grasping the meaning of that sentence, when a violent spasm wrenched my stomach. I coughed, hacking, throat itching as if I had just swallowed a handful of hair. I dropped the receiver. It dangled in the air, swinging back and forth. But that voice, it didn't turn off. "I'm right here." That sound emanated from inside my chest. I collapsed to the floor, hands clutching my throat, trying to retch violently. My throat bulged, burning with pain. My taste was invaded by the fishy smell of mud and the odor of old sewage. Cruck. I vomited on the floor, not gastric juice. I vomited a pool of pitch-black, viscous water mixed with moss and soil. I looked in horror at the patchy black puddle on the wooden floor. In the silence of the room, I heard breathing. Wheeze. Rasp. That was my breathing. My lungs were now heavy, waterlogged. Every inhale was torture, sounding crunchy like gas bubbles bursting in swamp mud. I looked up at the phone. Its cord. The cord I thought was wrapped around my leg. No. That pitch-black cord was burrowing straight into my navel. It had connected to me without me noticing. The phone was not the source. It was a funnel. Every time I picked up the phone, every time I pressed it to my ear, I had allowed it to pump that dark, cursed fluid into my body. Aunt Martha was right. She cut the cord to stop it from overflowing. As for me, I had turned myself into the new reservoir. I tried to rip the cord out of my stomach, but the flesh around the connection was black-purple and necrotic, fused with the plastic of the cord. "Too late," the voice echoed in my head, while my mouth, my real mouth, automatically mouthed those words without my control. "Now we are one." Pain tore through my stomach as the cord, now like a pitch-black aorta, contracted powerfully, pumping more of that freezing liquid into my body. Each beat synchronized with my heartbeat. Thump. Thump. I knew I would die if I kept lying here. I would turn into a corpse filled with sewage like Aunt Martha. I let out a feral howl, trying to crawl towards the spilled toolbox near the fireplace. The cord pulled taut, jerking my navel back painfully, but I ignored it. Blood and black water mixed, streaming down to the floor. My hand fumbled and grabbed a wooden-handled claw hammer. I turned around, facing the Western Electric 302. It still lay there, silent, coldly observing me. Struggle. "You want in?" I hissed through my teeth, mouth full of the smell of mud. "Let me help you!" I swung the hammer up and brought it down hard on the Bakelite body. Bam! The moment the hammer hit the phone casing, my head felt like it exploded. It felt as if I had just smashed the hammer into my own skull. Nosebleeds spurted out in a jet. I screamed in pain, but madness had overtaken reason. I struck the second blow. Crack! The casing split open. An ear-piercing shriek rang out. Not from the phone, but from the cord plugged into my stomach. It thrashed like a slaughtered eel. I struck the third, fourth, fifth blow. Bam, bam, bam. Black plastic shards flew everywhere. Each hammer blow was a time I felt my own bones cracking. But I didn't stop. The phone shattered, revealing the empty hollow components inside, now oozing a stream of pitch-black liquid identical to what I just vomited. With the final blow, I smashed the rotary dial. The cord connected to my stomach convulsed violently one last time, then with a foot sound, automatically fell off my navel like a withered umbilical cord. It writhed on the floor for a few seconds, then melted into a puddle of smoking black water. At the same time, a click sounded from the main door. The lock bolt had sprung open. I clutched my stomach, blood still oozing from the jagged open wound, dragging myself out of the house. I crawled onto the dew-soaked lawn, greedily inhaling the fresh air, even though each breath still sounded with a wet crunch in the lungs. Behind my back, the house at 42 Blackwood Street sank into deadly silence. 3 months have passed since that night. I am writing these lines from a shabby motel room in the suburbs of another state. I sold off the house for a dirt cheap price to a real estate company, not caring about the furniture or clothes left behind. I only took this tattered life with me. The doctors said I had acute pneumonia from inhaling toxic mold for a long time. They drained nearly a liter of black fluid from my lungs. They said I was lucky to be alive, even though my voice was permanently ruined. Now, every time I speak, my voice sounds hoarse, wet, like wind whistling through a broken water pipe. But they don't know the truth. I didn't dare use a phone anymore. I threw my newly bought iPhone into the river the moment it rang for the first time. I lived in isolation, doing manual labor and taking cash, but I knew it hadn't let me go. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, when I lie alone in the darkness, I still hear the ringing, echoing. Not from the outside. The ringing comes from inside my head. And worse, every morning when I wake up, I find my pillow soaked in a foul black liquid. The scar on my navel never fully healed. It always leaks fluid, and sometimes I feel it vibrate slightly, like the vibration mode of a phone waiting for a call. Aunt Martha was wrong. She thought the phone was the door. It wasn't. The phone was just the key. And now, the door is me. If one day you pass me on the street and hear an antique phone ringing, but see no one holding a phone, don't stop. Don't ask me for the time. Run away, because I am waiting. Waiting for the moment I can no longer keep that thing inside me.